Steve. I can't think of a better song to sing before that scripture reading specifically, but also before this lesson. This world is not our home. We are just passing through. Did you notice what was just read within this text is that what we're living in now is a tent. It's not meant to be permanent. We're going to be further clothed. It's referring to heaven, and we have God's Spirit as a guarantee for that very thing. I love when that happens, and I didn't talk to Brandon about that song, but that was, I got a little excited when I saw the song, and then I thought about it. You know, I was thinking about the fact that, we're happy to be home, but with this in mind. Because we were gone last week. We were able to go up to Kentucky to be with my parents, and my dad preaches for the Crittenden Drive Church of Christ, and so I wanted to hear him, but he wanted to hear me, so I didn't get a break. But got to be up there and be with them, and that's fine. It was great. But there is something about being home. And I thought about the next two verses, and this is where this lesson really found its origin. If you look at verse 6, Steve read to verse 5, but look at verse 6 of 2 Corinthians 5. It says, "So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we're away from the Lord." So that keeps in mind, it's great to be home, but realizing that while we're home, we're away from the Lord. And notice verse 7, it says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." Had a privilege of having a conversation with one of our members after the early service, and it's one of our newer families, Mike Cagle and Nikki, and their children. Well, Mike's dad, Jim, lives with them, and in Vietnam, he had shrapnel that injured his face. He lost his vision during that time, and so he told me this. He said, "I love that verse." Talk about giving new meaning to we walk by faith and not by sight. And it gave a new answer to the question that I have: what are our eyes for if we walk by faith and not by sight? Jim gave me the example that we don't need these eyes to be able to function and do a great job in raising a family in this life. Went to college after the war, and he's an inspiration to me and to all of us. And I asked him if it was okay if I mentioned that, and he was fine with that. But for us, what are our eyes for if we're simply to walk by faith and not by sight? I think Jesus gives a great example for what our eyes are for. And so we're going to be in the Sermon on the Mount this morning in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 22. We're going to allow 22 and 23 to provide us with our points. In the first place, Jesus said that the eye is the lamp of the body. So the eye is a lamp. And if you think about, that's something that it resonates with us. I mean, we know that the lamp that he's referring to is really a clay fold that was able to hold olive oil and sometimes salt to make it burn brighter. That gives a whole new perspective to you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. The salt literally within the oil helped it to burn longer. If you've got to constantly refill that fold of oil with, or fold of clay with oil, you want it to burn as long as possible and as bright as possible. So Jesus is saying that the eye is the lamp of the body. So he's referring to something that might be a little bit more dim than what we're used to. Literally at the flick of a switch, the lamp comes on. For me, when I think about a lamp, I think about something different, and it might be because the thing that holds the shade on a lamp is called a harp. And I guess because of that, it resonated with me. And so I started building lamps when Mary and me, when we first got married, and I was building lamps out of anything. In fact, you can if you drill a hole through something, you could put a lamp in. My wife was afraid I was going to turn the couch into a lamp and washer into a lamp. But I would take an old percolator, for instance, from a thrift store, and I turn it into a lamp, called it a Percolamp, and took an old Bakelite radio, and I had something I called light tunes, and light came through the tuning, and had fun with it. And so I turned it into a business called Trash to Treasure Litter Lamps is what we called it. And so that was something, there was always a different perspective to the light source. And I liked something that the moment you turn the switch on is when you saw the light come on. And so this idea of the eye is the lamp of a body, when I think about that, I think about something a little different. And maybe you've been in my office, you've seen some of those old lamps. I had one that is new since we've been here. And it's something that I built in memory of someone. And if you come into my office, you'll see it because it's actually mounted on the wall above the door. And so when I'm sitting at the desk, I get to see it. I see it, and it reminds me every day of something very important. But you'll see I've got a fishing rod that's mounted on the wall above the door. The elders love me for what I did to that office. But to the left of that is an old minnow bucket. It's the inside of the galvanized minnow bucket. It's just the strainer to pick up the minnows. And the lamp is on the inside of that, and when you turn the fishing reel, it turns the light on and off. And so, and it's got men on it with a dash and O. And I know how to spell minnow, but it's minnow, and I call it my Fishers of Men bucket. And the reason is because the reel, it was given to me, it was by Catherine Rogers, and I mentioned on Wednesday about the 5th year anniversary of the last conversation that I had with Brown on this side of heaven. And I mentioned then the conversation was completely about the church and beliefs. It was about the kingdom of heaven that Brown literally lived for, and that was his, I understand from Catherine, that was the last conversation that he had, period. And today is the 5th year anniversary of his passing, and it just happened that I wasn't planning on that or anything. But that was Brown's fishing rod, and so that's why it's my Fishers of Men bucket. It reminds me of the last conversation that I had with him that I mentioned on Wednesday. And so when I'm sitting at my desk, I every once in a while I'll just kind of stare up and I'll see it. And it's not meant to just be a light source for the office. It helps me keep in mind, in my mind's eye, what the true purpose of why we're here and what it's all about. Jesus said he'd make us fishers of men. Tonight we're going to be talking about those that he was speaking to. We're starting with Peter tonight as we're looking at 12 ordinary men. Many of them fishermen became fishers of men. But if you look at verse 22, it's telling us that something has just taken place. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body, and this is in direct relation to 19 through 21. If you'll look at that, it says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I called those lamps litter lamps, trash to treasure. Sometimes it's treasure to treasure. But really it's based on this passage here. Where is our treasure? Where are we looking? Wherever we're looking, if it's based on this earth, it's a treasure that will rust, that will be moth-eaten, it'll be riddled with holes, it will be stolen, it'll be trash. And that's literally the treasure. That's the reward. It's paid in full only in this life. But if our eyes are focused, if they're fixed on something that is spiritual, if they're laid up in heaven, then literally my heart cannot be broken. My heart will not rust. My heart will not be riddled with holes. My heart will not be stolen by anyone, because my eyes are fixed on heaven. And so when he says the eye is the lamp of the body, he's referring it to where my treasure and where your treasure is. And so the eye is a lamp. But we got to realize when we think about that, where the analogy leaves the page, this is referring to the eye being not the source of your light. what you see does not become the source of your light, no matter how much you want it. See, we can look to things and say, I need that, I want that. Christmas list, things like that, I need. That will fulfill what I'm wanting through what I'm looking at. But that's not going to fulfill you. Nothing in this life is going to be able to fulfill you. Your eyes can't be the source of your light. In fact, what eyes simply do is they filter light that's already there into your life. And so that means that the eye has a function. I could have just put function, but I had to put role, and you know the reason. But R-O-L-E is the role that we're talking about. The eye has a role. If you look at the second part of verse 22, it says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. So if every part, if the lens, if the cornea, if the pupil, if everything is working properly and nothing has been damaged, then light is able to literally refract, it's able to filter, and it will fill your whole body with light, and you'll be able to make out every person that is here. You'll be able to see and recognize everything. That's God-given. That's what God has given to us. But we have to the eye relies on the source of light to be able to see. So the eye is simply just passing on the message. The eye is not the source of our light as we think about a lamp. But the eye is what makes it possible for us to have light within us. And so it has a responsibility for the body. And if the eye is healthy, then we're going to be filled with light. And Jesus is saying this in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount after he's already said in verse 14 of chapter 5, the chapter previous, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. So it's meant to be a city that is in clear view. So that the world is going to use their lamp that is God-given, that is the eye, the lamp of their body, and they're going to see something different about those who have taken part in these blessings before it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I love how it's sandwiched with this concept of persecution in verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So he's saying if you've taken part in all of these blessings, he's saying you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You're burning bright for all the world to see. And so you literally become the light source pointing to Christ, to God, for the dark world around. That's why it is so important that we see verse 15. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. It's meant to have a purpose, that you and me, we have a purpose for this dark world to see light. That's why we have opportunities, we have functions that we do throughout the year, that we open up our doors to the community. We do it every week, but we do it also for our Pizza with Santa that we just had. And we had a great outpouring of people from our community come through these doors. I thought with the rain, maybe it would keep people. It did not. But in fact, we had people coming in that we've seen at other events, and it was, bless you, we got to see people in these events that we were able to encourage and try to continue the conversation. I've mentioned that before. But it was interesting. I got to see Buster James, the James Gang is what I call him, and Cynthia, his wife, and their children. They remembered us, and they've been able to come to other events, and we've been able to go to their door and have conversation. And he's been having a Bible study with his son, and those are things that we're just able to continue the conversation while eating pizza. And I got to see Carla again. She came from the last time we had the Pizza with Santa here before the pandemic is when I met Carla and her daughter Jennifer and her grandchildren. It was Andrew and Ariana. And they're there. And it was just so great to see them again. These are, again, opportunities as we're a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. COVID stopped a lot of people wanting to come within doors and coming to events. And so what a blessing that it didn't stop at this time. And we have opportunity. Please pray for this tilling process so that seeds and the seed of the truth and that's already been planted and being planted will be watered. Because I has a role, and every single one of us has a responsibility to represent the light for those who are seeing it. May we never hide it. May we never make it about ourselves. In fact, where does this light come from? If you will turn to John chapter 8 and verse 12, Jesus explains not only to his audience that they are the light of the world, and it's referring to those who have accessed those blessings. But in verse 12, he could say this because verse 12 says, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus is the light of the world. And so we need to use our eye, that is the lamp of our body, to look to his light, to make sure that the light that is coming within us is truly his reflection. That we're truly seeing what he taught, and so others will see through us Christ. So the eye is a lamp. The eye is also, it has a role, but sometimes the eye can reject its role. The eye can reject its responsibility. If you will, let's turn back to Matthew chapter 6 and verse 23. Because we saw that the eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. So it would make sense if it's not healthy, what happens? But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? He's saying if the light that's in you, if you are a part of the light of the world, but you decide you're going to cover it up and people aren't going to see it, how great is that darkness? You see, the influence that you can have in your life is an influence that can't be had by anybody else. It's your life. And so you're able to meet people that some of us have met before, maybe. You know, living in the same town, we're going to maybe all have mutual friends. That is one positive of social media. Sometimes you can see mutual friends. How do you know so-and-so? Oh, that's great. But at the end of the day, the people you interact with, that's unique to your influence. And that can't be pawned off on anybody else. That can't be farmed out, if you will. That responsibility can't be given to somebody else to say, I can't be the light. Well, that's literally covering it for everybody else that you are influencing. And in fact, remember back in John 8 and verse 12 that we just looked at, when Jesus said that he was the light of the world, he says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. He's not saying only the preachers, only the outreach ministers, only the youth ministers, only the elders, only the deacons who follow after me will have the light of life. No, he says whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That means the responsibility is on all of us to use the lamp that God has given us within our eyes to look to what is spiritual and our treasure be in heaven, not in this earth. But I'll tell you, it is so easy to sit there and be doing this. You know what I'm saying? Looking at the earth, looking at heaven. Looking at earth, we could be focused on, okay, I've got to pay this bill. You know, with that fire going on in the backyard, it has literally been burning since Thanksgiving. I've never known of a situation like this. I remember staying 24 hours at a house fire, and all we were doing was waiting for the smoke to reignite. And we sat there all night and watched one house fire. This has been burning since Thanksgiving, 100 yards from our house. I've thought a little bit about the physical nature of where we live. And I know I keep saying it, but it's on my mind. But it's easy for us to become distracted by this earth, by the things that we think are permanent. They're not. They're not. And Jesus is saying, if we're going to follow him, we cannot walk in darkness. You can't sit there and try to go between the two. We can't have treasures in heaven and treasures on earth at the same time. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. One distracts from the other. Galatians chapter 2 and verse 17, Paul is writing to those of Galatia, the Christians, that they're struggling with their eyes wanting to do this, but it's more looking this way or turning back. They're turning back from where they started with their eyes. And if you will, look at verse 17. He says, but if in our endeavor to be justified in Christ, we too were found to be sinners, is Christ then a servant of sin? Certainly not. He's saying, if we want to be justified with Christ, but still servants, to be still found as sinners, we're expecting Christ to serve sin. A servant of sin. Can Christ be a servant of sin? Can I say I'm a Christian and literally live of the world? This is a letter to Galatia. There's been something going around on social media I've been seeing. If Paul would write a letter to the churches, what would he write? I think he would write Galatians. I think he would write Ephesians. I think he would write 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. He's written those letters to the churches here today. And this applies to us in every way, because there are people who think they can live it up in this world and just be completely focused on this world because their heaven is in the bag. They have salvation, they can't lose it, and so live it up. Why not? That's a lie. It's a lie. He's saying, in fact, if we think we can do everything that the world does and still say that we're Christians, we're causing Christ to be a servant of sin. He was already a servant of sin when he was nailed to the cross, taking on our sin. But he can't stamp his approval on sin. That's why he died. That, in fact, pollutes the reason he died. It says that the reason that he died was pointless because you could just live in sin and it's covered. It's a lie. In fact, verse 18, he says, for if I rebuild what I tore down, Paul says, I prove myself to be a transgressor. He's saying, I died to myself. In fact, he told that to the Romans. Remember in Romans chapter 6 that we have an old man we died to. When we were buried with Christ in baptism, we rose to walk in newness of life. That old man was buried there, left in that watery grave, if you want the image and the picture of that. We can't pick him up out of that water and say, hey, come back. Let's build you back. Let's go back to the old way. Let's go back to that man, that woman of sin. Because he says that was torn down. See, Jesus tore down that dividing wall of hostility in his flesh when it was nailed to the cross. When he died, what also tore from top to bottom? The partition to the Holy of Holies. We have now access to the Holy of Holies through Christ. He's saying, I can't go back to the old law. In fact, this is what they're doing. In verse 19, for through the law I died to the law so that I might live to God. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. How many times can we say, but it's no longer I who live? You say, well, I'm living and I'm not liking what's taking place around me, and this is unjust. This is wrong. It's all about me. No, it's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. Is Christ living in me? Is Christ living in you? It says, in the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. So, yes, we're living in the flesh. We're at home in this mortal body, but because of that, we're away from the Lord, as we just read. That means that the flesh that I have is just a tent. It's not a permanent dwelling. For I now live in the flesh. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So this means that he does not walk in sight. And in fact, he's going to bring this up in verse 1 of chapter 3. Verse 21 says, I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. He's saying we have grace and we don't need to go back to the law. "O foolish Galatians." That's the next line. For some reason, a chapter has been put in the middle, and it shouldn't be there. "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified." So obviously someone in Galatia, the Christians saw with their own eyes Jesus was crucified. And he's saying someone has bewitched you for you to go back and try to rebuild what was torn down. To take that tapestry that was torn from top to bottom and let's try to sew it back and let's try to recreate that Holy of Holies. Let's go back to the law. It's literally been severed. But what's interesting is the word for bewitched here, it says to exert an evil influence through the eye. It's like sleight of hand. He's saying, "O foolish Galatians, who has exerted an evil influence through the eye? Who's blinded your eye? Who has bewitched you? Who's tricked you?" And it means the evil eye. And I'm not talking about the one when you were in trouble as a kid, that you received the evil eye, the evil stare. You're in trouble when we get home. No, this is the evil eye of the person who has bewitched you, the person who has tricked you. So they're so quickly going back to the old way. And in fact, Galatians 1, it actually brings out, Paul says, "If we or even an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel that you did not receive at first, let him be accursed." See, they're wanting to turn away from what was handed down to them. And they had already saw with their own eyes Jesus on the cross. And if they could be duped, if they could be swindled, how easily can we who walk by faith and not by sight? Because we didn't see it. We weren't there. But even those who did see it were falling away. We're trying to go back to some kind of a Judaizing situation. Galatians 2 is all about that. They were trying to force the Gentiles to be circumcised in order to be saved. And even Peter gave in to that. We're going to talk about him tonight in our class. They were taking their eyes, and at one time they were fixed on Jesus even as he was nailed to the cross. And they literally were taking their eyes off of Christ and turning back. It reminds me of Hebrews chapter 12. It's our final opening for our passage for our lesson, Hebrews chapter 12. And it's therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, it's referring back to chapter 11, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. How do we run with endurance the race set before us? If we're looking to Jesus, not looking to the weight, not looking to the sin that is clinging so closely. You see, when I'm focused on treasures of this life, it becomes a weight. It becomes something that literally just, it will drag me down in that current, and I will not be able to stay afloat. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. We look to Jesus because those who are a part of that cloud of witnesses, they look to Jesus as well. We have examples of those who've gone on before. We mentioned Brown Rogers, who looked to Jesus. And we remember his legacy. And we remember Catherine and Daniel as they're going down to Montevallo to pay respects. But he's not there. He's a part of the cloud of witnesses waiting for us. And I'm reminded of chapter 11 and verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. Chapter 11 and verse 2. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of the things that are visible. Verse 6, it says, and without faith it's impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Maybe you're here this morning and you're diligently seeking him. We understand it's by the word of his power that he made this universe. And it's by the word of his power that he has given us a way out of the trash in this life. He can take the trash of sin and He can transform it to treasure. When we're willing to confess that He is Lord, repent of the darkness in our life because our eyes weren't focused and fixed on light, be baptized in the name of Jesus for forgiveness, and truly put that old self away to rise to walk a brand new creature. Maybe you're here this morning and the light has been dim. You are a child of God. But because of the distractions in this world, things are going dim, and before it goes out, seek help. Seek encouragement. We're here. Can we help you in any way? Please respond now while together we stand and while we sing.